Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Satisfactory 1.0 specifically. I suppose this game has just gone into full release and it snuck up on me and came out of nowhere. So while we'll call this an overview, it's not exactly the same model I use for those on across it. I usually just have a spiel. I look at the first 2 hours of a game, give it a fair go in the refund window and put it on people's radars as a shout out. In this particular case, I played a lot of Satisfactory, especially in the early access of it all those years ago. So I probably put 100 hours into it on the Epic Store, but still I've picked it up and started out the first 2-hour intro experience, the tutorial, just to see how it holds up. Spoiler, it's magnificent. It's still as great as anything. So yeah, it's not exactly a first look, nor is it a robust review because I haven't been following it for a while and I'm kind of just going in fresh on the 1.0 build. But I suppose the main point is to let people know that it made it, which is great. Games that get through early access should always be celebrated. And in fact, this is a poster child for how early access can be. You know, they had a whole community team doing little mini skit videos and that with each update. And while I wasn't super closely engaged with it, or I haven't been for a while, again, a great example of being the exception to the rule, because sadly the rule is most early access is shit, or at the very least it's just testing the water with an alpha concept to see if it hits a viral kick. And if not, well, they'll just abandon it a couple of years later and move on. So yeah, it made it, it's great. I would also hope, because I have a pretty variety heavy base that watches my videos, maybe you are someone that would say you're not interested in this sort of game. I feel like anyone that is into this, that is to say, you know, complex automation, factory management things a la Factorio, and in many ways this is a spiritual successor to Factorio. I would say that this is as good as a first one of these as you're going to want. And coming fresh off that tutorial experience, it does very, very well to really gently lead you into what will very quickly become a system crashing, overwhelming, complex experience that just eats your hours. And it's going to do the same to me, God help me. So yeah, what can be said about Satisfactory? Well, like I said, I said spiritual successor to Factorio. It sort of is. There is a holy trinity trifecta as I see it. It's those twos, and then there's DSP, Dyson Sphere Program, which is a bit newer, coming from a different sort of pedigree. But for a long time, Factorio was the king in the ring, the only thing really like it. In fact, I think there's some DLC coming out for it this month. Can I say that? I think so. And as much as you can't take the crown from the king, I would argue that it kind of had its moment, and in a way, almost a generation similar to console generations of this kind of game. And now it is kind of Satisfactory's turn. So I'm not trying to tiptoe around it. Factorio is a game you could play until the end of time quite happily. It's quite brilliant in what it is. But of course, it does have that certain art style, that forced perspective that's actually going to turn off probably a lot of more modern gamers. This has the potential to get more people into this genre, which is wonderful because it is an example of a game that will give you a bazillion hours of gameplay, but not in a bloated way. A lot of the loop comes from essentially how idiosyncratic and insane and perfection-based you personally are, and I feel like this, for many people of a technical mind, would be a Zen garden type game. At least that's what it is for me. And I have that background, the more sort of mathematical, engineering based background, and, you know, more code and system based these days. And look, on the other side of it, there are people that will look at this and say, nah, disgusting. I couldn't possibly play this. I couldn't see anything being more stressful. That's fine, each to their own. But that's how I've always sort of seen this. It's kind of an infinite Zen garden, and it's kind of cool to see 1.0 is finally here, that there is an end to it. I'm sure they're going to do post-release support, but yeah, definitely the most accessible one of these, and that is probably the main takeaway from this video. It's not aimed at people who have 10,000 hours, because they're going to put another 10,000 hours in, right? This is more a shout out and a call out to those who are standoffish. Funnily enough, I was standoffish with Factorio for years personally because of the aesthetic. So I understand, I sympathize. So if ever you were going to jump in, this would be the one to do it. It's got its own sort of clean futurism charm to it. It's pretty light on narrative as well, which is fine. The idea actually kind of taps what I would call a male, not power fantasy, but there's a certain male nerd fantasy that I can understand. The idea that you plop down on this planet and you just need to one man build this self-sustaining factory system, and at the core of it you kind of have your central building hub, and you set milestone missions to ship goods off-world, and there's a cool little animation where the little shuttle launches up. So there's progression in there, which is probably worth really emphasizing, because I know I'm not the only one that, as much as this sort of thing appeals, infinite optimization of systems, the thing that violently turns me away is the very open-ended nature of your open world survival type games that just make your own fun. No, and I know there's a lot of other people that feel that way. But yeah, this has clearly demarked progress steps that you're working towards, which, you know, gives you a sense of feeling of a greater whole. Look, I'll briefly go over the loop. Like, I'm not trying to put it off or anything like that, but I think it's fairly apparent what's going on here. Essentially, you're just trying to automate production lines, and they will start at the resources straight out of the ground. There'll be little, like, the iron ore fixed spawn points with a quality to them, and you can use, you know, well, like a chisel to do it by hand in the early goings, but very quickly that scales up into things like mining machines or little robots, but then into actual full-on self-running machines that need power, and then you create a power grid, and then it becomes cable management. Conveyor belts will take the mined minerals into another machine, and you can choose a recipe in that to decide what to construct, and that'll spit it out at the other end. Very readable, very accessible, throughput at a glance type efficiency numbers, right? So if a belt maybe will move at a certain speed, like let's say 60 units per minute, kind of makes sense, 60 seconds, but maybe for whatever reason you're not extracting that fast. Maybe you have like an impure iron ore vein, so you can only get so much out of it. So there's an efficiency bottleneck there. Then you get into things like splitters and combiners for the belts. You might be producing something like copper wire, which will have its own quirk where it'll spit out 2 items every couple of seconds, that sort of thing. So all the printouts and numbers will be there, and it's, you know, to your end. Do you want to create little buffer zones like storage containers to make up for power shortages? Because yeah, optimizing to 100% is all good and well until you add on a new machine to your network and it shorts the entire power grid and your entire factory stops. Now, do you have any sort of proviso for that? Maybe you make multiple grids, maybe you create buffers. I came up with a pretty elegant solution. I remember way back in early access, there was like a ticket shop. It was kind of a way to just trade trashed resources into a fiat currency that you could then in turn use to buy other things. And I remember actually creating a factory that would have little 1% runoffs of pretty much every machine with a scarlet mental contraption that will just peel things off and put them straight into trash bins, selling them into shop tickets. And it was actually a pretty elegant solution. So when a production chain finally bottlenecked, it would actually just dump all of the resources from the production chain straight into this trash exchange, and before long you'd be building up tickets. But that's just my point. It depends how your mind works. Some people are more aesthetically driven. Some want to make giant spaghetti, insane stuff, and, you know, to try and trigger their anal retentive mates. And there are other people that want to have very clean, laid out factory floors, or again, you might be more interested in optimizing, or the factory must grow. Bugger it, create a production chain and move on and tap another resource, because the map is so huge and full of different biomes. The ability to just grow and grow at albeit low efficiency is pretty uncapped as well. Anyway, look, it's just some broad strokes talking about the game, reminiscing a little bit, and hopefully getting some people on board that were fence sitting. If you're already into this sort of game, if you already understand the virtual crack that it is good for you, and maybe you didn't know it was 1.0, so they're the 2 prongs that matter to me in this video, honestly. Letting you know it's finally done and you might have missed it just like me, and letting the other guys know that if you're one of the 1% that haven't given this sort of game a go for whatever reason, this right now is the best time ever to jump in and give it a go with Satisfactory. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.